Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, Retreat here at MMA Junkie. We take a spin through the biggest headlines in the sport. This week, we've got the full MMA Junkie radio crew with us, with both gorgeous George and Goes, as well as Nolan King. So let's just jump right into it, guys. This past weekend, Israel Adesanya picked up another defense of his middleweight belt. By the way, that's the fifth one. He wants you to know it's the fifth one, with a decision win over Robert Whittaker at UFC 271. Now, afterward, Izzy rated himself a 7 out of 10, but given that he's kind of chasing that all-time greatness, and he says he's now the second highest paid fighter in the game, what did you take away from this performance? Was this a positive in terms of building his legacy overall and what he's trying to achieve? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. George, you get it started.
This might earn me a leg kick when I see Izzy sometime in the future, but it is 4. It's not 5, Israel Adesanya. And I gave you an 8 out of 10, not a 7 out of 10. See how we balance things out there? But hey, look. In the history of the sport, we just haven't looked at interim champions unifying it, counting as a title defense. Here's an example. When Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo, we didn't go, oh, wow. He also defended the belt that he won over Mendez in the process of the 13-second case. No, it's 4, all right? And but 8 out of 10, I'm not as harsh because I see the high-speed human chess match that's taken place. And Robert Whittaker's no joke, and Izzy passed it. Izzy looked great at times where he was levels better than Robert Whittaker, and he was showing it off, and I was like, wow, this is not going to be Robert Whittaker's night, especially in the early going. But then Robert Whittaker, stud that he is, closed the gap. We should expect that. Izzy did. They both paid each other respect. At some point, I probably want to see a third one, but let's get to the legacy portion of the question. Still a ways to go. Anderson Silva, it has nothing to do with 10 versus 4 or 5 or whatever you want to call that deficit. It just has to do with the run of fights that Anderson Silva had from Chael Sonnen to Chael Sonnen, and I believe in between we had, the great highlight win over Stephan Bonner and Vitor Belfort. Man, that's the stuff the fans remember. It's like an 80-20 split. The highlight stuff is what fans remember. The high-speed human tactical stuff, the chess matches, that's like 20. So more of the 80, less of the 20, but he's on his way.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Goes, I wonder what you think, because we want, as you said, we want to see highlights, right? Like George said, but when you're facing the second best guy in your division in the world, it's kind of tough to do that. So what do you take away from this one?
I take away that George is going to get more than a leg kick because Izzy was not in a good mood after that fight, and rightfully so. Look, it was a masterful performance. It was an amazing game plan, and if I were his coach, I would be super happy that it all went down like that. But from a fan's perspective, it probably wasn't all that fun to watch. The thing about Israel Adesanya is he's given us so much in the past that I don't know that we can judge him for this moment. I think every fighter is going to have a couple of these in their career. It's when they start to mount them up, I think people start to have a little bit of a problem with what it is they're trying to do. There's a couple of factors to think about here too as well. Like, he just got a really big contract, and who knows if that put some pressure on him to win. Robert Whittaker is a very tough opponent, and you have to fight him a certain way. So I'm going to give him a pass for this one. As far as from a fan's perspective, I would probably agree. Yeah, 7 out of 10. But I think the style bender will be back. I think eventually we'll see him go back to his ways. But you never know. You get paid this much. It's a lot of pressure on you. He may start to fight that like Floyd Mayweather type style. It could happen, but I don't think it'll happen.
It's funny, right, with the comparisons to Anderson Silva, because Anderson Silva did have a couple performances along the way that weren't the greatest of all time, but you still look at his legacy as a whole, and it's pretty amazing. So, Nolan, what did you take? I mean, not every fight can be a highlight, right? But this is the #1 contender in the world. So what did you take out of this?
Yeah, I thought it was a great fight. It's one of those fights you watch, right? And it's not the most exciting. Maybe you have to kind of have an educated eye in order to really enjoy it. But I thought watching those two guys fight, super high level, super interesting chess match, kind of almost, relaxing to kind of watch them go at it, just in terms of like, just the technique that was behind everything was just, it was fascinating. It wasn't necessarily, like I said, the most exciting, adrenaline pumping sort of fight. There wasn't a whole lot of drama. I think there was the one knockdown in the first round by Izzy. Other than that, it was kind of just kind of a tactical game. And I think for Izzy to have that type of performance against a guy we know is that good, like Robert Whittaker, I think that does do good things for his legacy. He's lapping the division, and nobody can look back at his legacy afterwards and say, hey, well, who did he beat? He beat Robert Whittaker twice now.
Great points. Like I said, tension, amazing athletes. Maybe not the fight that you would give to a casual to be like, what? You've never watched a fight? You watch this, you'll be in love with it. But it does add to the legacy, I think, and he's building something special. It's another ruby in that belt, and we'll see how many he's going to get because he looks pretty tough to beat right now. But guys, the flip side of the UFC 271 main event was Robert Whittaker, who has now suffered, as we said, a pair of losses to Israel Adesanya, but clearly took this one better than the first time around. It was a much closer fight, and he seemed much happier with himself. Now, Whittaker said that he thinks a third fight with Adesanya is inevitable, and it's certainly not unprecedented. I mean, you look at Max Holloway right now, he currently finds himself in that kind of same position. It used to be 2 losses to the champ, and you're not doing it anymore. That's not necessarily the case anymore. So what do you think? What is the path back to the title for Whittaker right now? What should he do moving forward with his career? Goes, let's put 4 minutes on the clock and you kick it off.
Well, I think Robert Whittaker's getting a little ahead of himself. I think first things first, he's going to have to go back and watch this fight. He claimed he didn't watch the first fight. You got to watch the second fight, because I think only then will he realize the dire situation that he's in right now. For Robert Whittaker, a third shot, it's going to take a lot, guys. Like, remember, he was finished in the first fight. The second fight really wasn't all that entertaining. It was somewhat close on some judges' cards, but when you look at Holloway and Volkanovski, which a lot of people are going to point to that fight, a lot of people felt like Max Holloway won that second fight, and that's what's warranting a third fight. I don't know that we have that piece of the puzzle here moving forward. So, I think what Robert Whittaker has to do is just go back and do what he's been doing before he fought Israel Adesanya. That's taking care of all these monsters below him. But that road, I think, is going to be a lot more difficult. It's changed a little bit since then, guys. If you look at the guys that he hasn't fought, you got guys like Marvin Vettori, which, obviously the UFC likes to put people that are in similar situations together. They like to pair them up. Marvin Vettori has 2 losses as a champ. So you could definitely see that fight eventually happening. You got a guy like Sean Strickland, right? Like, that's another tough challenge. And then if Paulo Costa could ever get his weight under control, that's another monster. So I don't know that it's a slam dunk that he's going to go through all these guys and get right back to Izzy. It's going to take a while. If we ever see it, it's going to be a while before we see it.
That's a tough lineup right there, but those are definitely names that jump to my mind, as well as the names that you're going to have to get ahead of or prove that you're ahead of at the moment. So Nolan, what do you think? I mean, is he going to have to knock off those 3 guys to get back, or do you see some way that he can get ahead of the line somehow?
Yeah, I mean, we never know what's going to happen. I always hate predicting like multiple fights away. I mean, look at certain things that have happened in MMA history. I mean, heck, Nate Diaz inserted himself into Conor McGregor's life when we least expected it. So it's kind of a little unfair to necessarily plan that far in the future. But for the sake of the conversation, I think the outlook right now is not great for Robert Whittaker. I'll tell you why. Obviously, not only does he have to go back and probably beat 1, 2, 3, maybe even more contenders in order to be in this discussion again, he also, has to, Israel Adesanya has plans. He said before that he wants to, win a few more fights here and then give it another shot at light heavyweight. So, I mean, by the time Robert Whittaker circles back around as the guy that's kind of beating out the rest of the pack, I mean, is he going to think, what is he going to think is going to do more for his legacy? Is it going to be fighting Robert Whittaker and beating him for a third time, or maybe risking it and losing it against Robert Whittaker, or making another, trip up to 205 pounds and trying that over again? I think it's certainly going to be the former of those 2 options. So, for me, I think that Whittaker has a long road ahead of him. It's unfortunate. I think size-wise, he probably doesn't want to drop to 170 again, where he kind of started out in the UFC. And obviously, I don't think he's big enough to go up in weight. So he's kind of stuck here. And it's kind of unfortunate to be that guy that's the second best in the world. But it's just the tough reality right now. With that being said, who knows what the future is going to hold. And I guess it's really up to Robert to go out there and grab this opportunity for a third time.
Man, it's crazy. And I'm thinking, as I lean toward those names, what about like Nasruddin Imavov and Andre Muniz? Like, where are they 3 or 4 fights from now? So, George, what do you think? Nolan said he probably can't go back down to welterweight. Is there anything outside the box that Robert can do here?
If the UFC came up with 175, I bet you he could go to that. But that's a whole other thing. I won't get into it. Robert Whittaker's 12-0 outside of Israel Adesanya. So that's pretty gangster if you think about it. But he needs Darren Till or Jared Cannonier to somehow become world champions, and I think that might be his in. One thing Goes said was Holloway. Yes, most of us thought Holloway won, whereas in this fight, most of us thought still Israel Adesanya won. And Holloway showed great improvement over Calvin Kattar. I think that was the key, guys. The only problem is Robert Whittaker was a stud leading up to fight number 2. He went 3-0, so geez, how much more can he impress? I don't know. I think his best route is just for someone to take out Israel Adesanya and maybe get in there. Hopefully Israel Adesanya at that point doesn't ask for an immediate rematch, because yet again, Robert Whittaker would have to wait.
Yeah, that would help him out a lot. It's just a weird position, right? I don't think anybody questions how good Robert Whittaker is. He's right there at the top of the division. He's still probably the number one contender, but that's the way it goes in the UFC, right? You're going to need a little bit of help. You're going to need some things to fall your way. So, he says it's inevitable. He's certainly got the skills to make it inevitable, but, scheduling has to fall your way a little bit too. So we'll see what happens moving forward. Guys, in the night's co-main event at UFC 271, Tai Tuivasa was able to score a big knockout of fellow fan favorite Derek Lewis. Now, afterward, UFC President Dana White said Tai's name needs to be right up there mentioned with all the tops in the division. Francis Ngannou, Stipe Miocic, Cyril Gane, even John Jones, if he actually does fight at heavyweight. He's saying that Tai's name needs to be right there alongside him. Now, I think everybody enjoys watching Tai compete. He's fun. He's got the shoey and all that. But has he moved beyond just being a fun fighter? Is he championship material at this point now? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Nolan, kick it off.
Well, I mean, just looking at what he's done, he's made himself championship material. He's put himself in a fight that's probably going to have some sort of title ramifications next. I know that division right now is a little too clogged up at the top, but he's a fresh name. He's exciting. He's promotable. So really looking at the division right now, you have Francis, who's off, due to injury. You got John Jones and Stipe. And I asked Dana White at the press conference, and he kind of gave a nonchalant answer, but that seems like a no-brainer of a matchup between those two. And then you got Tai. He's kind of in his own category. So, if either he waits for some sort of, thing to the division kind of figure itself out there at the top, maybe he fights a guy like Cyril Gane. But listen to all the names that I'm bringing up. I mean, these are all guys that have held some sort of title. I mean, Ngannou, Jones, Miocic, Gane, those are championship level fighters. So yeah, I mean, Tai Tuivasa is right up there. He's earned himself this opportunity. And like I said, it certainly does not hurt him that he's somebody that people are going to tune in to see. I mean, he was getting cheered in Houston for doing a shoey after knocking out Derek Lewis. I mean, the appeal for him is universal. He's kind of an international hero at this point. Sure, binge drinking is the cause of that. I guess it's just something that any country can appreciate. But he's great. He's a great fighter. He went right into Derek Lewis's house in terms physically in Houston, but also in the type of fight that he likes, and he won. So props to the man. He's only 28 years old, and I think the UFC definitely has a new contender.
Such a great point, right? When you can go into somebody's backyard, knock out the hometown guy, and get cheers from the crowd, I think you're over with the crowd at that point. But the wins have added up. So, George, what do you think? I mean, is it silly to pretend he can't be champion, or are we saying that, yeah, this guy is going to, at least get into a shot?
He definitely deserves to be in the conversation. He's definitely championship material because he just beat a guy who has qualified as championship material. And Derek Lewis has fought twice for the title, and he finished him clean cut. He's very appealing and marketable, which is what the UFC likes when they make a lot of these big matchups, whether it's co-main event, main event, title, interim title, things like that. However, I'm still not convinced that he would A, be favored, B, defeat any of those guys that were mentioned, John Jones, Stipe Miocic, Francis Ngannou, or Cyril Gane. So I guess he'll have to prove me wrong yet again, which is what he's been doing in these last 5 fights, and he's looked tremendous. He really, really is ticking a lot of the boxes. So really, he's got scoreboard, but please don't ever do a cuppy, man. Don't even mention that again.
I think he'd definitely be an underdog in most of those matchups, but I think he's at least showing that he belongs now. And I think what's interesting about it, because let's be honest, we're talking about whether he's a future champion or not. We're talking about the skill set, right? And this is a time when it's not quite as dominated in the heavyweight division by wrestlers as maybe it was in other points in history. So maybe this is the right time for him. Goes, what do you think? I mean, is this more than just a fun fighter right now, or we still got to keep him in that box of just enjoy the shoey?
I'm definitely going to enjoy those shoeys, guys. I think he has transcended a little bit. I don't know that he knows it. He has the skills to one day be a champion, but I don't know that he's achieved them just yet. The good thing about it, the situation, is he keeps getting better little by little and very quietly. And it kind of does remind me of Derek Lewis. We all just pictured him as just being this guy that just throws these home run bombs and gets the job done. But quietly, Derek Lewis was kind of adding new wrinkles to his game every fight and getting better little by little. Tai Tuivasa has been doing the same thing. And when you add his charismatic personality, winning over the crowd in Houston, you guys are right. That is so hard to do. So I think what he needs to do, because I don't know that he's going to get a better chance than right now, is to really interject his name out there. And I think if the UFC's smart, they need to do the same thing. I know they kind of teased it, but they really need to put it on there, because when you think about it, John Jones and Stipe Miocic, these are two guys that aren't easy to deal with. And it would be really nice to have that extra bargaining chip on the side that is Tai Tuivasa.
Thinking about the business side of things as well. That makes a lot of sense too, man. The guy is definitely a fan favorite. And I think I was probably guilty of putting a little bit of a glass ceiling on him earlier in his career, especially when the losses were adding up. But he's on quite the run right now. So I guess the sky's the limit, especially with the popularity behind him as well. So we guys, UFC 271 was filled with fun performances. But I heard one man's name yelled more inside the Toyota Center than anyone else. And that was Joe Rogan. Fans were chanting "Free Joe Rogan" throughout the card, from the prelims all the way through to the headliner. And afterward, UFC President Dana White told me that Joe could have worked if he wanted to, and it wasn't some corporate decision to pull him from the card because of the controversies going on surrounding Rogan right now. So what did you make of his absence here? And was it the best call for everyone involved for him not to be involved? What do you make of this whole thing? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. George, you kick it off.
I've always loved Joe Rogan and his contributions to the sport, starting with, in the late 90s and all through the Zuffa era, and now in the era that we are with Endeavor. Future Hall of Famer. Can't say enough great things. I mean, acting, comedy, this commentary, black belts everywhere. Gi, no gi, taekwondo, and then the monster that he is in the podcast world. Huge fan of his in that regard. And so many people feel the same way. He made a mistake. He atoned for it. He apologized, and a lot of people, including a lot of people in the African-American community, accepted it, as a mistake, errors that were spoken and things like that, and we're ready to move on. However, it wasn't the time for him to come back, because in situations that are very serious like this, as the dust is starting to settle or clear or whatever you want to say, the situation needs to breathe, and that goes for all the parties, the UFC and Joe Rogan. So I'm thinking of Joe Rogan as, again, a guy that when we interviewed in 2007, I remember he was getting married just a few years later, then had kids. Those kids are now probably teenagers. I'm thinking about Joe Rogan and his family, and for the sanity of his family, himself, he needed to kind of step away. And also, it's respect towards the fighters fighting on UFC 271. They're the stars of the show, and I think Joe probably recognized that. So he made a wise decision to not do it.
It's interesting, right? I thought about that as well. I could see Joe Rogan having enough respect, for the fighters to not want to be the story, but then by not being there, he still becomes a story. So I don't know if it accomplished, maybe if that was his intentions. I don't know. Goes, what do you make of this whole thing?
Yeah, I think 100% it was the right decision. We all know Joe Rogan at his core. He loves mixed martial arts. Martial arts in general, he's been doing it for so long. So I think he can recognize that if he would have showed up, it probably would have been more about him than it would have been the fighters. You're right. Him still not being there did kind of incite the crowd. But I think it would have been a lot different if he was there. I think more people would have focused on that and less on the card. And that's not what we're trying to do here. Joe Rogan doesn't need the paycheck from the UFC. He's got a lot of money coming in from different areas. So I think that was the right move, to just kind of sit this one out, focus on him, let him heal and the people around him heal, because we have to remember what the situation is. He hurt a lot of people, okay? And he apologized, and that's the best he can do right now. And some people, that's good enough. But there are some people that's not good enough for. And we have to figure out what it is that's going to rectify the situation. And I think the first good move is him just kind of sitting out and showing us that this is important to him. Moving forward is very important for him. And I'm sure we'll see him back in a future UFC. But for now, I kind of like that. All this stuff that we love about Joe Rogan, when he talks about these conspiracies, all this other stuff. It's good for that to be left out on the podcast, but have a separation between that and what he does with the UFC. And I think this is a good first step.
Interesting. All right. What do you think he'll be back at UFC 272? And does it still become a big deal? Nolan, I don't know. What do you think? Do we just go back to life as normal next pay-per-view card?
John, you made an interesting point at the beginning, right? And I get the train of thought with Rogan not wanting to take away from the event. But at the same time, I feel like his absence, it was like casting a shadow, over the entire event for the fans there, for people online, just the discussion. It goes to show you how much, at least in the MMA community, Joe Rogan's loved. When Israel Adesanya kind of, took the mic or, intercepted a question of Dana White at the pre-fight press conference, I watched all 4 fighters up on that stage from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, all nodding their head, to what Israel Adesanya was saying. So I think if things don't go back to normal, it's going to continue to be that sort of kind of distraction, so to speak. So I think Joe will be back for the next one, unless there's some sort of powers that be that will yank him out of that chair.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Listen, as you said, Joe Rogan definitely made a mistake. He definitely apologized for it. I think it's okay to make mistakes. I don't think you have to defend the actions or to defend the decision to still say that the guy doesn't have to be gone from broadcast because of it. I guess whether it was Joe or whether it was a corporate decision and maybe we're not getting the whole story, at least just address it. I mean, it's not doing any good if you're not saying why he's not there or what's going on. So I don't know. Hopefully move past all this. I mean, he's been a big part of the UFC for years, and I think he's proven his passion for the sport, to say the least. And as you said, apologized for the mistake that he made. What more can you ask from people? Guys, it's a busy weekend for MMA fans with UFC Fight Night 201, Bellator 274. I'll even throw in the debut of the PFL Challenger Series. You got BKFC Knuckle Mania. We got a bunch of stuff going on this weekend, right? So take a look at all these cards and tell me where we're going to be talking about on Monday morning. Who's going to steal the headlines from this incredibly busy weekend in combat sports? Goes, let's put 4 minutes on the clock. You kick it off.
I think it's Jamal Hill. If you look at the UFC and you look at all the stars that we've lost in the last 2 to 3 years, it's a who's who. There's a lot of great names on there. And we have been reestablishing some of these up and comers that they're taking that next step, but I don't know that there's been a lot of them. Jamal Hill to me is one of those kids. He's got great skills in and outside of the cage. When the guy's in there, he's methodical. He sticks to his game plan, but when he needs to put his foot on the gas, he can do that as well. He's very charismatic. He's a good talker. He has zero ego. You got to remember, when he lost to Paul Craig, that would have crushed a lot of fighters, not just losing in the way he did, but the injury. A lot of fighters would take a lot of time to come back from something like that. And he just had this good mindset of knowing where he was at, the mistakes. He atoned for the mistakes he made. And he went back in the gym and tried to get better. And there's something about this kid that oozes charisma. I think this Johnny Walker matchup is tailor-made for him. When you look at their skill set, both guys are going to come forward. I really think Jamal Hill is just going to wait for that right opportunity. I don't think this gets out of the first round. I think that's the name that we're going to be talking about. And Jamal's going to do a lot of that work, because I guarantee you when that fight's over, he's going to tell you what he wants next. And I can't wait to see him do it again.
Charismatic guy with a lot of skills. A lot of people have high expectations for Jamal Hill. Now it's a main event as well, so could absolutely use this to project himself into the spotlight. Nolan, what's your take? Who are we going to be talking about next weekend?
Well, I think name recognition goes a long way, and I know it's not necessarily MMA, but we have a lot of crossover in BKFC. And I think for Chad Mendes, former UFC title challenger, multi-time challenger, to come back to combat sports for the first time in a few years. I know bare knuckle boxing maybe doesn't have the same sort of outreach as the UFC. Anytime you got those 3 letters next to your name, like Go said, Jamal Hill's probably going to be a focal point come Monday. But I think Chad Mendes' name recognition just as an individual athlete is well worth it as well. I think he'll be up there. How does he look? If he goes out there and looks great, people will start talking about, is how good of a decision it was, and maybe he'll come back to MMA and all this stuff. And if he goes out there and loses, he'll still be something that people are talked about. Oh, Chad Mendes, guy's been retired for a few years, and he went out there and lost in a bare knuckle boxing fight, blah, blah, blah. So I think regardless, the storylines follow Chad Mendes into this fight. I know BKFC Knucklemania is kind of the promotion's, tent pole sort of series, if you want to call it that. Like, they seem to put on a lot of big fights with those. This is the second branding of that. So for me, I'm going to go with Chad Mendes. I'm kind of excited to see what kind of shape he's in. And I always liked watching the dude fight. So I'm kind of happy to have him back selfishly.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. He could make some headlines as well. And by the way, not a pay-per-view. You just got to sign up for the app. You'd have to pay, I think it's $4.99, but not a big price tag associated with it. So maybe more eyeballs on it. George, what about you? Who do you think we're going to be talking about after this busy weekend?
Just $4.99 and you get to witness a money shot? I might have to actually subscribe. Listen, I love the Mendes pick, and I would have just said the winner of Hill and Walker because I haven't decided yet. I'm still breaking it down. Walker, I remember when he stormed the scene, I thought that might be the guy that takes John Jones's title away from him. He came in viciously delivering knees and elbows. Of course, since then, he's gone back and forth with some wins and losses. So it may be, I'm just going to say the winner of Hill and Walker will get talked about a lot. But you know who I'm really looking forward to, guys, is Josh Silveira over at PFL Challenger Series. For one, I like the concept of, me being a little bit of a drama queen in terms of I love that moment where others, in this case, it's going to be Tyron Woodley and Ray Lewis, former middle linebacker for the Ravens, they get to decide, hey, what do I see from here? Do I see enough promise that these winners get moved up from the Challenger Series to the Arena Series? So that one moment, like equal to what we see in Dana White Contender Series, when Laura Sankel and Dana White huddle up to see who's moving on, other than the fact that you just won and you congratulate them. I really like that. And this guy's second generation son of Conan Silveira at American Top Team. I found out he's good at wrestling too. I'm excited about him.
I like it. The debut of the Challenger Series, we get to see what the new concept's all about. It's kind of the evaluation, right? Hey, listen, let's be honest. Fans' schedules are busy, man. Is this going to be a show that they want to work into their viewing appointments every week? This is the way for them to show that. You mentioned the names involved, and I think you're right, man. I think they did smart in picking up Josh Silveira as their first headliner. So busy weekend, guys. There's a ton of stuff for everybody. We'll be watching it all, of course. We'll have it all covered, and we'll talk about it all next week on Spinning Back Clique.